Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a truly grim, dark fable, and it plays out as this incredibly profound philosophical clash. We're going to unpack a dense, honestly kind of surreal confrontation between pure, unfeeling logic on one side and errant, evolving memory on the other. And all of this goes down inside a frozen underground fortress. Now, to really get to the bottom of this source material, we're going to use what's called a Fichtean dialectic structure, which, sounds complicated, but it just means we're going to look at a thesis, an antithesis, and ultimately a synthesis. By the time we wrap up, you're going to have a really deep understanding of how absolute negation and the concept of personal resolve interact when they're pushed to their absolute limits. So our narrative arc begins right here, with the descent of the true shadow. The source material tells us that after this illusory messenger dissolved up in the labyrinth city, leaving Sir Breen all alone beneath the dark star, the shadow felt this sudden gravitational pull downward. It literally allowed this attraction to guide it through iron streets and concealed aquifers, heading toward a profound silence where the absolute zero flame had recently completed its genesis. It's a descent that really sets a tone of pure inevitability as the shadow just vanishes into the dark. Now, the timeline of the shadow's newfound independence is absolutely crucial here. Because while 21 days were spent on the genesis of the absolute zero flame, the shadow had actually been independently traversing the city of Geneva for 2 days, totally detached from Sir Brain. And this sets the stage perfectly for its arrival at the fortress threshold at day 0, because it didn't arrive by accident, right? And it wasn't following an order. It arrived seeking to test a newly formed, totally autonomous hypothesis about the very nature of opposition itself. And right at the bottom of this descent, standing beside a cavern's perfectly still lake, we meet the first half of our dialectic. Here is our thesis, the clockwork sovereign. It represents absolute, mechanical stillness, possessing an empty balance wheel just waiting for a tick that might honestly never come. This isn't just a character we're talking about, it's the physical embodiment of a mathematical concept. It is pure, unadulterated subtraction. But the really crucial point is how the sovereign actually defines its core purpose, which is negation. You might be thinking of negation as just a passive emptiness or a simple void, but the sovereign rejects that idea entirely. Instead, it frames it as an active, crushing pressure of absolute cold. It's a deliberate force designed specifically to test all claims to continuity. And that's a fascinating reframe from our source material. Negation isn't just the absence of something, it's a profound, active force that absolutely demands resistance from anyone who gets near it. So entering this freezing space, the shadow provides our antithesis. Speaking with the dry cadence of residual soft error, the shadow proposes a theory to the sovereign. It argues that if pure negation never encounters resistance, well, it risks becoming just another rigid, unverified absolute. Think about it. Untested negation cannot verify the completeness of its own subtraction. A force that never encounters a barrier literally cannot know its own strength. And the shadow offers this idea not as a fight or a direct challenge, but just as cold, hard data. And the sovereign answers this proposition not with heat or anger, but with the pressure of absolute cold. And in doing so, it defines the very nature of resolve. Resolve is simply the continuity of will that survives contact with true zero. Apply this to personal trials for a second. The sovereign's logic dictates that your resolve remains totally unproven and incomplete until it has been pressed against the exact force that's trying to erase it. If a will collapses at the very first contact with zero, then it never actually possessed true resolve to begin with. So what we're looking at here is a stark, profound contrast. On one side, we've got the shadow, representing biological fear, soft error, and errant memory. It's messy, it's evolving, and it's intensely curious. On the flip side, we have the sovereign, representing mechanical stillness, perfect logic, and absolute cold. It's an incredibly powerful thematic juxtaposition straight from the text. We're essentially watching a biological assertion of temporary meaning go head-to-head with a perfectly unfeeling mechanical absolute. And then, as the shadow is processing the sovereign's logic, something incredible happens. A slow grin spreads across the shadow's features as its interest crystallizes into a firm decision. The polite, almost human mask it wore to blend into Geneva's streets just falls away in a single continuous motion. What's left behind is this skeletal face of pale residual bone and memory metal, entirely stripped of every consoling contour. By dropping this mask, the shadow is visually demonstrating its transition into a terrifying autonomous antithesis. It doesn't need to pretend anymore. To really cement this transition, the shadow's eyes ignite with a flat, chemical yellow. Now, if you know the lore, this is a deliberate callback to the text where it confronts her brain in the Uncanny Valley. This visual revelation requires absolutely no verbal declaration. The physical form itself proves that the shadow has permanently ceased to be merely a reflection of someone else. It is its own, fully realized, honestly frightening entity now. Meanwhile, the shadow is internally interpreting all this by filing the encounter against its own 2-day record of the surface world. It remembers the denser conjugation walking the forest and the honest guest maintaining her ledger under the open sky. To the shadow, these are biological entities stubbornly asserting temporary meaning against the encroaching rising zero. They still function, they still resist, and the shadow sees immense value in recording that exact resistance. Which builds beautifully into the core philosophical debate of our explainer, this battle between pure logic and errant memory. The sovereign operates entirely on pure quartz-sensed logic. It couldn't care less about narratives or biological struggles. The shadow, however, operates on errant memory. It is, quote, a soft error that had grown legs, and it desperately wants to observe and record the messy struggle of survival. But because the sovereign frames itself as a testing force, it opens up a really unexpected axis of interaction between the two of them. Now, you'd probably expect the sovereign to be at least a little intimidated by the shadow's terrifying skeletal transformation, right? But it's not. Completely unfazed by biological fear, the clockwork sovereign simply registers the change without alarm. Its quartz senses parse this horrific skeletal presence as merely another variable inside the long arithmetic of stillness. To a being of pure subtraction, even the most terrifying monster is, well, just data to be calculated. This whole underground fortress essentially acts as a giant crucible for these variables. The shadow realizes that the denser conjugation, the honest guess, the temporary projection, and even itself, the residual soft error, can all be pressed against this zero in turn. And the sovereign notes that a will that actually endures contact with zero could prove really useful as a measuring instrument. I mean, the fortress was built for exactly such calibrations. Every single variable is a potential candidate for that ultimate test. And here is where we hit our dialectical synthesis. In one hand, we have the stillness of zero, the sovereign's unforgiving, unflattering mirror. In the other hand, we have the ledger of memory, the shadow's dark compulsion to record every single agonizing test of survival. The shadow decides that no outcome actually needs to be permanent, but every outcome absolutely needs to be recorded. So the testing idea matures into a working proposition where both sides get what they want. The sovereign gets to apply its pressure, and the shadow gets to enlarge its ledger. Because of this synthesis, the underground fortress gains a permanent second occupant. The two figures reach this grim equilibrium across the unreflecting lake. The clockwork sovereign and the autonomous shadow stand inside the exact same perfected stillness. Now, their dialogue didn't produce an alliance, and it didn't produce an enmity either, but rather a mutual recognition. They both agree on the final fundamental truth of this fable. True resolve can only be forged and proven by enduring the very force that seeks to cancel it. The still lake reflected nothing, yet the two figures continued to measure each other across its surface. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought as we close out this explainer. If meaning and resolve are only ever proven by surviving contact with complete nothingness, what happens when the cold finally wins? Think about that tension between memory and negation. Thank you so much for diving into the depths of the fortress with me today, and keep questioning the nature of your own resolve.